said in through Dynamics GP, and I'm actually using version 2016 R2, so this is current shipping product. If you have an older version, some of the things might look a little different just because Microsoft does tend to update the interface from time to time. And I will say that if you're brand new to Dynamics GP, you'll probably learn several things this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're at. If you've been using Dynamics GP for several years, you can probably work on email during the presentation. You might actually pick up a few things, but some of this will be geared mostly for new users, and so you may see some things that you do every day. So, but hopefully there's at least one thing in here that everybody picks up during the session. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We do have a lot of this documented in the slides, and so as Ashley said, the presentation's recorded, but we'll also make available the slide deck. And so if you see something and you don't get it down in your notes, or you want to go back and refer to it, you'll be able to do that from the slides. And so really we're going to look at just kind of the common system-wide navigation features that are built into Microsoft Dynamics GP. Towards the end, we'll talk about user preferences and how you can personalize your experience with the interface to your own liking, and then talk about the navigation pane a little bit, and then spend just a minute or two on the help system and how all of that works. And again, if you've been a long-time user, you probably know some of this or maybe most of this already. So the first thing that we want to kind of set out some definitions here, and so I'm using the Microsoft terminology. It may not be what you normally refer to different parts of the system as, and that's okay, but for the sake of the learning today, we'll stick to the Microsoft naming conventions for the different parts of Microsoft Dynamics. And so the first thing is the navigation pane, and that's really made up of a couple of different things. The home page, obviously, which you probably all log into and see at least some version of this as you go through the software. And you know probably already that you can personalize that or customize that to your own liking. And so that's kind of the first part of navigation. But the actual navigation pane itself is the part of the system that's on the left there where you see the pointer going to. And so that was added, I think, back in GP 10 timeframe. So it's been with us quite a while inside the interface. But the navigation pane really is part of the shortcut system built into the software that we should be able to drive things from really not ever leaving our home page if we so choose. And so we'll talk more about the navigation pane as we move through. The address bar is across the top, and so if you think about your browser, Internet Explorer or Chrome or whatever you might use to browse the internet, that address bar is very similar. And so obviously we're not looking at the web client here, we're looking at the traditional or the desktop client, but the navigation bar or the address bar will actually show us the navigation that we're making as we kind of drill into the system. And so if you're talking to support or you're reading materials or training videos, when the address bar is mentioned, that's kind of that area that is being talked about. The help menu, I think you probably all figured out, even if you're brand new to Dynamics GP, you can access the help system from the little blue question mark up there right under the X that would normally close the window. The layout button is one that people tend to overlook, although it's right there beside the help question mark, but the layout button allows you to personalize the shortcuts that show up at the top part of your screen. And we're looking at these in slides, but we're going to flip over to the software several times and actually go through these with the live product. And so there'll be more to come, so to speak. These are just kind of tell you what we're going to show you. And so that's our layout button. The layout button allows us to turn on and off additional toolbars, and so you'll see that in the live product here in a minute. Things that we work with every day if we want shortcuts put onto our top menu system, in the form of icons typically, that's the place to do that task. And so this kind of area that's highlighted here is really the top menu system. This is the traditional menu, so these are classic, and so meaning they've been there since day one, and so this is really how we had to navigate the system for many, many years because this was the one and only way to get into cards and transactions and reports and so forth. So that's still there. A lot of people still use that, so if they're very mature users of the product, that's the way they learned because that was the only way. And so many times we find ourselves going back to that. I know I do because that's all that was there for 15 years. And so that's certainly still a valid way to navigate through Microsoft Dynamics. Okay, so at this point I'm going to minimize the slides out here and bring up the software. So this is again Microsoft Dynamics GP 2016 R2, but will look very similar to GP 2015 and GP 2013. If you're on an older version than 2013, you might see some changes in the interface, but this is current shipping product. And so here, just to kind of call out a few of those things that we looked at in the slides, from my home page, I'll just go into the accounts payable entry screen just for sake of simplicity here, and so I have that on my home page. And I think everybody probably knows if we put stuff on our home page as far as reports or windows that we work in, that we can navigate the system with one click, and that's really the shortest possible way to get to a particular part of the system. If we use any of the menus, whether they're the left navigation menus or the top menus way up there at the top of the screen, it's going to take multiple clicks, sometimes 3, 4, or 5 clicks to actually open a window or get to a report. There's not a way to do it less than one click now, unless you have a touch screen, and then I guess you wouldn't have to click at all. But if you're using the mouse, the fastest way to navigate to any part of the software is to bring whatever it is you work on onto your home page, and then with one click, away you go. And so here I've opened the AP entry screen, and I'll navigate to the help from this window. And so when I go to help, because we have a window open, the about this window is actually available. And so when I click on that, this senses where we're coming from, and so you'll see it has the window name up here, and it has kind of an overview of the window and the navigation of how we got there. So from purchasing, we went to transactions or transaction entry. And so there's at least 3 clicks, and of course we had to get to purchasing, so we either have to do that from the navigation left menu or from the top menu, and so there could be another click or 2, and so you see where the kind of the 3 to 5 clicks come from if we use the traditional menus and don't do this from our home page. But the nice thing about the help that I actually use a lot are the fields, and so this tells me kind of an overview of the window. It's very short, one sentence here. It's to put a payable in, and then anything that might be related to that is kind of listed. Now, is this 100% of everything? Probably not, but it's most things that are related to the topic of payables transaction. But fields is where a lot of folks go, and every field on the window, on the payables window in our case, is listed here, and it's usually alphabetical order, so it's not the order it appears on the screen. It's alphabetized with, of course, numbers coming before letters. And so if you had no clue what you were supposed to put in for description, for example, then there's a little section here that tells you what you can do for description. And so that's content sensitive. It's very, very good in that it knows where you're at and brings up the appropriate portion of the manual. Now I'm just going to minimize that for a minute. I'm going to go to the help way up at the top here, and so we can navigate help from the main window, and we can do that. But of course, when I say about this window, well, what's open behind is my home page, and so it's going to bring up in the manual in the help system things about my home page. And so I could still navigate to the transaction payables transaction, but I'd have to find payables management and transaction and transactions, and you see that's a slightly different window, and so that gets me close, and then I'd have to get into the actual transaction entry here, and so I can still get there, but that's going to take several clicks if I navigate from kind of the generic or the very top help menu here. And so that's why I usually do recommend, if you have a question about something, at least open the window or the part of the system that you have a question on, because that'll drive you into the help system much faster. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close that, and I'm going to move over to just the purchasing area page here. And so here I've got everything pulled onto the screen that involves purchasing, and so again I'm one click away from anything that I might have access to based on my security. And so as I do move over into the different parts of the system, some people like to think of this as the different modules, and that's okay. These are called area pages, and so I'm in the purchasing area versus the sales area or the financial area. But when I move off of my home page, what I see here now in all of the different area pages are a list of out-of-the-box options that I might want to work on. And so, and of course, the security model is sitting on top of all of this, and I'm not going to be able to see things that I don't have security to see. But if I want to see what Excel reports are available, for example, in the purchasing part of Dynamics GP, I just click on Excel reports and have a totally different window now than anything else I work with. But here I can see all of the Excel style reports that are listed here, and so there's a number of them, and these are all out of the box. If your system doesn't have these, you might just need some help deploying the Excel reports. They're all free. They come with the software. If you do need help, just let us know, but most people do have these deployed, and of course it's just like anything else in the system. You can change these up to your own liking. You don't have to, you're not stuck with what Microsoft did. But here's a purchasing dashboard. So if I click on that, that'll open in Excel for me. Let me drag that over here. And so here's an out-of-the-box purchasing dashboard built into the software that would have your data. Of course, I'm looking at sample data here, but it would have your live data, and could be useful for people that have access to this part of the system. And so you'll see that in all of the different components of the software. So we see one of those in financial, sales, purchasing, inventory, payroll, and so on. Okay, and so that's fine, but now I want to go back to all of my purchasing menu items, and all I see are my dashboards or my Excel reports here. So on every part of the system, as I navigate to the different area pages, the very top level up here will be kind of the traditional menu items. And so, if I toggle over to sales, you'll see I could look at the Excel reports that are available in sales, very similar to purchasing, but I want to get back to my traditional GP menu items for sales. So that's always going to reside on the very top part of the window, my navigation window here, as I move around the system. And so the other thing that is a very nice tool, but a lot of people don't use or don't even know about, is the transaction area. And so the second one will actually open yet another window, and this is true in all the different parts of the system, and sometimes it takes a few seconds to open because I do have some charts and graphs kind of populating on my screen as well, and they take just a few seconds to build out. And so here is all purchasing transactions. Now if I was in sales, that would say all sales transactions. If I was in financial, it'd say all financial transactions, and so forth. And so here, this is just a list of all purchasing transactions, and of course I can't do anything here other than view them. But if I wanted to view this particular transaction, if I just check the box, then I see information kind of down below about that transaction, and I can drill down into it. So there's my blue drill down, so I can actually drill back into the data. And so that's good if the transaction I'm looking for happens to be up on the screen, but in my case, it's not. And so what I want to do is use some of the filtering here, and I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to say, and it's kind of like Smart List, I'm going to say where the date, but I'm going to switch that to the vendor name. And so, in fact, let me go over to sales because I know I've got more transactions in sales, and that might be a little easier for us to get the data out. So sometimes the sample data, we tend to use the same vendor every time. So same idea here. I'm going to say and instead of the date, I'm going to say the customer name. I don't know the customer number, but and then it says, does it contain, does it begin with, is it exactly equal to, is it not equal to? So very similar to what you would see in the Smart List. And I'm just going to say begins with, and we'll say, I think I have stuff in there for a travel. Nope, I don't. So we'll use Aaron. And so we'll just say it begins with Aaron. I don't know what the name is, but I know it starts with Aaron. And of course, I know I have lots of transactions. So now the window here is filtered by the customer name Aaron. And so, and of course, then I could add a filter and say, you know, if I was looking for a date range, maybe a particular date, and we'll see if we have anything dated, you know, May 1st, for example. I probably don't. And so we'll just see if there's anything that comes back with that. And looks like not. But, you know, that's very quick and easy to work with the subledger data as you kind of navigate through and toggle around. Well, so I don't have anything May 1st. I want to take that off. You'll see the red X. I can just click that, and the system will go back to where I left it with the first filter and a refresh, and I've got all my data back. And so that's a very overlooked part of the system, is using these list views. And of course, if we find something that we like, you'll notice that again, all of the details about the transaction, as I kind of move through the different transactions, the very bottom part of my screen is changing here and showing me kind of the highlights or the details of that transaction. And so I'll make that just a little bit bigger so you can see here that this item number was actually on this particular invoice. And so it gives me kind of a lot of the important things about, in this case, my invoice. And if I wanted to you know, take some action against that invoice, you'll notice that as I tick one off, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10, I have the ability up here now to do some things. And so I can, you know, send documents, I could print documents, I could send the invoice out in email, I could post the invoice, I could print things out, I could mass transfer orders into back orders or invoices or quotes to orders or whatever it might be, and deal with holds and so on. And so this becomes now the action pane, where once we make a selection below, we can take action on groups of documents. And so the idea here is that if there's many documents that we want to take action on, this would be a place to do it versus calling up each individual document and having to then do something. Okay, so let me flip back to my home page here, and I mentioned the layout button in the slide, and so here's my layout button, and we'll see here that I can go to the toolbars, and I really only have the main toolbar on, and which is the transactions, inquiry, reports, and cards way up at the top. But if I work in finance a lot, I can turn the financial toolbar on and maybe the purchasing toolbar, and you'll see as I do that, that icons start to appear on my top menu here. And so this allows me to put these shortcuts onto the page, and once I have those up there of those things I work on, I can customize this if I like, and I can actually add different things if I want to. And so you'll see the different toolbars now that are available. And so if I never use the quick journal, but that's on my financial toolbar, I can come in and just take that off, or I could rearrange that up and down. I could add things to the toolbar. I could change the button image, so if I don't like the little picture that Microsoft is using, I could do that. I could change the toolbar to text only or image and text. And so what that means is show me the picture, but then tell me what it is so I don't have to hover over it. So Quick Journal, with one click, I can get into the Quick Journal then, and I know what that is because I added the text by it. Now, of course, you don't have room to do too many of those with text because that will fill up your top part of your system here. But the idea is that these are options to take action or to move about the system with shortcuts, icons, text. If you don't like doing that on your home page, you could use the classic or the kind of the top menu part of the system. Okay, so let's go back to the slides and pick up where we left off here. And there we go. And so that's kind of our first little demonstration of what we were talking about. So the next section starts off with menus, and these are the top menus, what I'd call the classic or traditional menus. So most of you probably have used those or seen those, so nothing new or different there. The menu system is really using kind of the traditional window menus. If you have an older version, you might have a file menu, or you might remember Dynamics GP when it had file, and then you had the traditional Windows file applications. Edit was also a menu choice. That's a common Windows menu choice, a top menu choice. We have tools, which are where some of those things that you don't work with on a regular basis are tucked away, and then of course help, which we looked at. There are ways to zoom into data, and so most of you probably know that when you're on a screen, there's a way to actually zoom or drill down, as we say, into other parts of the system. Some of that happens just with the mouse pointer, and especially on your home page, when you hover over an option, you'll notice the mouse pointer changes from the pointer to the little finger, hand with the finger up, and index finger, that is. And so that's a common Windows tool or technique as well. And many times you'll see the different colors in the system, and of course there's ways to change that, which we'll look at in the third part of the system here, or actually maybe towards the end of this one. But when we go into our user preferences, we can change our colors. But the red typically is required. The blue means that there's drill down or drill back information. And then we see the little blue arrows, which allows us to zoom back into additional fields or additional screens even. And so we'll look at all that here in just a minute. Lookup buttons, most of you probably have figured out. The little looks like a magnifying glass or spyglass. Those are the lookup buttons that show us what our options are, what our choices are, so we can select a piece of data into the window. And then the browse button. So back in the day, some of you may not remember this, so but those, we called them the VCR buttons, so the video cassette recorder. So a lot of you probably remember having VCR tapes at home. So Ashley's probably too young to know what that is, but a lot of us had VCRs. Well, the same button system worked inside of Dynamics GP, where the most left button would take us to the first one in the list, the far right button would take us to the last record in the list, and then the two middle allowed us to scroll through either kind of up or down the list as we moved through it. And so those are still there, so we call them the browse buttons today, because VCR is not it's not a popular word anymore, so we call them the browse buttons. Okay, so let's go look at some of those things. And you notice the mouse is going from the pointer, which you see, but as I hover over an item, and of course these of course are hot links, or meaning that with one click we can execute here. And so as I hover over these, we get the little finger pointer there, and that's just that's traditional Windows. So if I click on the AP entry screen with one click, then that opens it up. And you know, this typical window here, the looking glass is, or the lookup button here, shows us anything that might be out there for us to pick or to select. You'll notice also that, let me save this back, that when I hover over the lookup there, it says there's a keyboard shortcut, Control-L, back in really to the DOS days, but all those still work. And so if I don't want to go to the mouse, sometimes that takes an extra blink of an eye to get your hand over to the mouse. You could just stay on the keyboard and hold down the Control and tap the L, and you can execute the same command what you would with the mouse. And so so very simple there. The browse buttons are down here, and so this would be the very first record in the list, in this case of payables that I have sitting out there waiting to be posted. But I can scroll through the list, so you'll notice that that scrolls right through there. I can go to the very end of the list just by clicking on the far right button there. And sometimes people, they wonder, well, how is it scrolling? It's pulling up. In fact, let's go to the accounts here. You'll get a better idea. And so here's my GL account entry window. And so if I start off with the first one and then I scroll through, that's cash, cash. Yep, that all starts to make sense. And you know, they wonder, well, how is this going through the list, because it seems to be skipping things. You know, now it's going to savings, which is, you know, that could be cash, and then it goes into receivables. Well, it's scrolling by this drop down right here, and so these are the scroll choices. If I want the scroll to be by description, then it's going to alphabetize, and again, numbers always come before letters. It's going to alphabetize the account description, and so you'll see now it ignores the account number, and it's actually just going alphabetically through the list of accounts. If I want it by account number, then I have to pick account number. I could have it go by category, meaning kind of the category cash, receivables, payables, fixed assets, and so forth. I could have it scroll by segment, or at least by main segment, by account type. And so really, when you're scrolling with these lower buttons, you just have to quickly pay attention to how you want the scroll to be presented to you. And this setting should hold. So if I have it set to account and close the window and come back in, it will still be at account. And so sometimes you're scrolling through and you're thinking that that it's missing something. Well, it's probably because the sort was changed and it's still changed. And so that's a very powerful feature. Just remember to use it as you do the scroll. Okay, so let's go back. Let me get rid of that one. We'll go back to the slides one more time. And it seems like they get slower every time I tell it to present here. And so the next group are a little bit more advanced, if you will. And so these are to start off with our expansion buttons. And so those are going to be the little blue arrows that you see on most any window. And most of you probably know that that means there's more data back there. So that blue arrow means, you know, take a peek, almost from the gaming days of there's stuff behind. And so we'll look at how that works here. The hide and the show button is off to the right of any window that has compressed information, and I say compressed meaning that they're saving screen space, they're saving real estate for us by tucking some of the information, a second or third or fourth line of data, tucking that out of our view for us to not see quite as much when we open the window. And so we can show more, or we can hide the second, third, fourth, and so on lines. And so that's what those buttons do. When we're on date fields, a lot of people don't realize that the date fields can be changed by just hitting the plus or minus key. You don't have to go type in dates. In fact, the idea is that you really don't ever type in dates unless you just love doing that. But if we're just going up or down a day or two, we can use the plus and minus keys to advance or go backwards. We can pick a date from the calendar control or the icon. We can pick today's date from the calendar control. Or we can type, if we just type just 2 characters, the system assumes that's the day of the month. If we type out 4, then the system assumes that we're giving it the month and the day. And then if we type all 6 or 8, then it assumes we're giving it the month, day, and year. And so I'll show you how that works here in a minute. But that's kind of a big one because a lot of people don't realize that they can save a lot of data entry time with dates. User preferences, this is for you, so your user, it doesn't affect anyone else in the software, and regardless of your security, you should all have access to user preferences. So that should always stay with you, even though you might be locked out of 95% of the rest of the system. You should always be able to get into your own user preferences. And so we'll look at how to get to that window and what we can change there, but we see some of those things here. You'll notice that we can set our default report destination to screen or printer. So if you, every time you print off the menu report, if it always goes to the printer, that's where you can change it. If it always goes to the screen and you want your reports just by default to go to the printer, you can set it there, or you could check both of them and have both be executed. If you'd like to use the enter key, that's used to be called the return key. So for a carriage return, and again, going way back to the typewriter days, remember a carriage return, well, that transitioned over to the computer keyboard where we had the return key. We typically call it the enter key now, but the software comes kind of out of the box designed to use the tab key to move between fields, which a lot of us have gotten used to, but some people still like to hit enter instead of tab, and it doesn't disable tab. Tab is always going to work, but if you like to hit the enter key, then you want to come into your user preferences and hit return, and that will allow you to field advance through all of the windows with the enter key. Okay, so we'll take a look at a few of those. Talked about those, and then we'll also look at, from your home page, some of the reminders that you can pre-populate onto your home page. And again, these are just for you. If you do it, it doesn't affect me at all, using the same system, so it's completely independent. And this actually extends to the smart list reminders that we might have running or could have running as well. And so we'll see how that works. And then the final part of that is any task. If we want to put a task down either for ourselves or another user of the system, we can assign tasks to other people if we have the rights to do so. And so if you're going to be out on Friday and you want to make sure someone follows up with something, it could be a process in the system, or it could just be a general note. It's free form. You can just type away, and you can put a reminder on someone else's homepage with the task list. And so I'll actually do one of those for you. And you kind of see the new task screen down there, which I'll show here in the software in just a second. And then I think about the last part here is the navigation pane, which is kind of the left part of our home page, where we can navigate through the system, again, without using those more traditional menus across the top. And you saw me do that going into purchasing and bringing up the entire purchasing area page of every purchasing option that I have access to, landing then on my page. We flipped over to sales for a minute, and we saw all of the sales menu items being pulled onto the sales area page, and so that's part of that navigation pane bar or area. And so I'll show you how to change the size of that or to get rid of that, and add shortcuts to the top part of your navigation pane. Okay, and so that's just the three things that we already talked about there. And so, and this is telling us that if you don't see the navigation pane, you can turn it on and off. I'll just show you how to do that. It can be done in just a few clicks there. Okay, and so then the last kind of part of the demonstration here is I'll go back into another window, and let's see, I think I'll go into the payables vendor or transaction inquiry here, and so we'll just call up an inquiry window. So just a kind of a common window here, and I'll just grab a vendor and I'll use the bottom scroll buttons to do that. And so here's a vendor with lots and lots of data, and so you see the several things here that we talked about, and so I'll make that just a little bit bigger. You see the blue expansion here, and so if I wanted to see this particular transaction and I highlight that, I can click on the expansion, and that will show me if there are, in this case, payments, and so which they're not. And if there were payments, in fact, maybe I should go into history, and because history should mean that we have a payment, but you know, sometimes in my sample data I do things that I should not, and so it doesn't look exactly right here. And so, yep, that's the danger of sample company. Sometimes it's not like real data. And so here we have actually the hide and the show buttons as well. And so when I click the bottom button, which is the show, it opens up. You'll see I've got two lines of data here because I've got two lines in the heading. And so when I click the down one or the show button, I see both lines. And that's a busy screen, and we can't get as much on the window that way. And so Microsoft typically will close that up, and it gives it a little cleaner look, but they realize that we might need to see some of that data, and so we can toggle that to our own liking throughout the system. Now in GP 2016 R2, a feature was added that actually will remember the setting, and so most of these, they're like this. They're kind of compressed or condensed, and they stay that way. Well, there are some windows that maybe I want, when I open that window, for me, I want all of the details there. And so in 2016 R2, the system will actually remember the setting in many, many places throughout. And so when we close this, we close the software and go home for the day and come in tomorrow and I come back into this window, it's going to open the window with the screen expanded here so I can see all of the details. And so that's kind of a nice little feature that adds a lot of productivity for us in 2016 R2. Okay, so let's say I'm going to sort documents now by date, so I'll just turn on the date field here. Well, of course, you know, we can pick from the calendar, so we don't have to type things in. Let me go back to April, where most of my stuff is, and then I'll limit that to April 30th. Instead, I think I'll just pick today. So the other feature with the calendar is it knows today's date, and if I want today's date, I can just click it, and so I don't have to select it or go to the month. I can just click today's date down at the bottom of the calendar. Well, this isn't really what I wanted here, and so let me change this a little bit. And so if I hit the plus key, you can see my date changing there, and if I hit the minus key, you can see it backing up to where I was, and so an even spanning months. And so that's one way to go a few days forward or backward. But maybe I want April 20th. Well, I don't want to hit the plus key 18 more times, so I just type in 20, just like that, and then either enter or tab if I've selected to use the enter key, and you'll notice that it takes the day. It assumes the day if I only type 2 characters. And so if I want it to be the first, I have to do 01, and it sets the date to the first. And so that's just an assumption the system makes. Now if I want this to be March 15th, I have to do 0315, and it'll know that that is the month and the day now coming in. And so there's never really a reason to be typing a lot of dates. You know, unless you really like that. You can use the calendar or the plus minus keys, or like I do, I just type in quickly either the day or the month and the day, but to type out the whole date, there are very, very few places in the system that we would actually have to do that. Okay, so back onto my home page now. Everybody should have the user preferences on their home page, and that will bring up the preferences screen. We talked about where my reports should go. You'll see that I do actually like the enter key, so that's how we did things 20 plus years ago, and I still like that option, although I can use the tab key. It doesn't disable it, as I mentioned. We can set reminders here, and so these are my reminders. So if I want these things to appear on my home page, I can decide how many days before this actually occurs do I want the reminder, and I can display it as a visual cue. And so we'll do that. Collection tasks overdue, I'll do that as a queue, even though I had that one on there. And then I have custom reminders. These are really just smart lists that I have access to, and so I want those on my home page as well. And then the task list is the other piece, and so here's kind of the out of the box. So these are tasks Microsoft did, but I want to create a new one, and I'll say please check on vacation time for Brian. And so that's good. I'm going to assign that to another user, so we'll just suppose that this is another user. And I could link this to a GP window if I want them to actually click and open a window, so I take them right to the task that I want them to do, or I could have a web page link if I want to take them out to a website or a file. So if I want an Excel file or a Word document or just any application, I can link out to that, or I'll just set mine to be no link, but this is a very powerful feature if we decided to use that. And so those things will all show up now on my home page, and the collection tasks do. I want to be a visual cue, and there may not be any of those, but now I'm actually going to go log in as that user, which was my name as well. And so I should see that reminder that my boss gave me here. And so when I log in on my home page, because I do have reminders set up, we see now I have a task. Please check on vacation time for Brian. And so that's how you can get everybody else to do your work for you, and they'll never know it. And so this is pending. Well, I'm going to go in and I completed that, and so I'm just going to mark it completed. And when I do that, then let me just cause that page to refresh. You'll see now it disappears off my task list because it's been done. Now what it doesn't do is it doesn't go back and tell the other user that, you know, that was completed. It's not quite that smart just yet. But my navigation pane, you'll see tucked over here. Well, if I'm having a hard time seeing it, I can make that really large. I don't recommend that because then your workspace is very, very small. But sometimes we'll see people and they have the navigation bar like that. And so that clearly shows us that they don't use it, but they don't want it in the way. They want more workspace, and so, which is fine, but it's still kind of taking up a little bit of the screen. So what you could do is come up under the layout button, and you'll see navigation pane is checked. Just click it, and the navigation pane goes away. And so, and you've got the full use then of your screen. Now, if you want it back, you can just come in and check it, and it puts it back. And so, so that's really it for round one of navigation. And again, if you've been using the system for many years, you probably have seen most of that, if not all of it. But hopefully you picked up maybe one thing that you didn't know existed or had a little refresher on. If you're new to the system, hopefully you picked up several things. But Ashley, do we have any questions sitting out there?
It doesn't look like any questions have come in yet, so you must have done a good job explaining.
Well, we can always say that, but so in the second round, which I think we're doing
11 o'clock Central tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay, so thanks for the reminder. So we'll look at a little bit more detailed navigation, and not anything that's harder, but just as we start to dig into the system and kind of get down into the different kind of the guts of the software, so to speak, we'll look at some other topics as well. And that probably will take about the same time. It's not anything that's super complicated, but again, stuff that you may have seen, but maybe not. And so if we don't have any questions, then you have 14 minutes to relax before you have to get back to work at 2 o'clock Central, and or you can just go now. But hopefully you saw something here that might be useful, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow for round 2 of the same.
Great, thanks, Brian. Yep, and if you haven't registered for tomorrow's session, the registration page is located under the events page of our website. And we'll talk to you all tomorrow at 11 o'clock Central. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. Bye.